Diablo 4, one of the most marketed action RPGs of all time, presented as a return to form for the franchise and its creators, the recently Microsoft acquired Activision Blizzard, with emphasis on the Activision part, and was initially received with almost universal praise. With its return to a more gritty tone over the more cartoonish presentation which its predecessor, the polarizing Diablo 3, was much maligned for, and a couple of relatively successful open beta access periods, followed swiftly by a launch that was hugely successful at a financial level and fairly smooth compared to its predecessor, as well as many online-only live service games at launch. Blizzard at one time were considered the absolute gold standard in the art, but have vastly fallen from grace in the period they were consumed by Bobby Kotick's Activision. But with reports of the title being the fastest selling Blizzard game ever made, the developer seemingly had finally caught a win in a few years of controversy after controversy and meme after meme. In a time when competition in the space is fierce and Diablo and Blizzard not holding the weight they once did, the game was very cleverly marketed and constructed so its numerous flaws were not readily apparent. A well-made campaign that, although meandering at times, particularly in the mid-sections, had a narrative that ended well despite being a cliffhanger, with the series antagonist that game is named after being nowhere to be found. It seemed like the Diablo franchise was finally in good shape with a bright future. That is, until the credits rolled on the campaign. Hey, denizens of the webinets. I am Necropants, and today, on the dawn of the series' second season and a massive patch update on the verge of being deployed, I want to tie a few things together with my content regarding the game and give you my thoughts about the state of Diablo 4 and if this massive update is enough to turn the game around and sway the plummeting public opinion. This was originally supposed to be a review, but I ended up having to scrap it because, to my shock, Blizzard announced a pair of 2-hour-long developer talks, and when revealed along with dozens of pages of patch notes, seemingly has addressed the overwhelmingly vast majority of my complaints and critiques about the game. This completely blindsided me because until this point, although it seemed Blizzard were listening, their response was extremely slow, and the last few updates have only managed to make the game less fun. The title of this video is not really clickbait. I generally believe in its current Season 1 form, the game's about a 4 out of 10. I would give it a 6 when I'm feeling particularly generous, but the more I've played the game, the less generous I feel about it. So instead I thought I would go over the patch notes and lay commentary over the specific changes they have made that address my concerns, and then summarize to close that even if Season 2 saves the game, as it were, I would still have issues with. And I feel if everything lands correctly, I would probably concede that Diablo 4 is finally out of a paid beta situation, and I could potentially elevate my score to a potential 7.5 to 8 out of 10. The question is, do we trust Blizzard at this point to pull it off? I can't give them that credit at this point, but whatever the answer is, we are soon to fuck around and find out. So this will be a little bit of a rambly, disembodied voice-like video. There's probably not much to watch here. I'm just going to put a bit of my background footage on while I ramble on about this crap in my disembodied way, and you can just maybe go about your day or take a nap and treat it like it's a Diablo ASMR video or something. Diablo. So this game really falls apart once the campaign finishes and you get into the end game content, where you're only really halfway through. You've got 50 levels of, unfortunately, which tend into quite a boring grind of the Nightmare Dungeon situation, and you'd end up sort of completing your gear around level 70 to level 75, basically doing the same handful of dungeons over and over again to level your glyphs. And also you would have to navigate through the world on your horse, and more on that later, which wasn't fun to use, and then get to the dungeon and go inside and then complete the dungeon, go back to town, rinse and repeat. Now, everyone hated this, so the first thing they've done, they changed this so you would teleport to the Nightmare Dungeon by using the sigil that you would collect. But it kind of backfired. Obviously, they hadn't got their coding in line with how the game currently functioned. So instead, the sigil would take you on a loading screen outside the dungeon. So you had 2 back-to-back loading screens before you got into the dungeon. Now, personally, I would have preferred if they'd actually made a change so the journey to the dungeon was actually rewarding in itself, because it's like they've got this big open world where there's nothing to do in it. You get through the campaign, the open world seems pointless, and it's also not randomly generated. Like Diablo 2 actually felt to me more of an open world. So now they're actually teleporting you in Season 2. When you use the sigil, you will now go inside the dungeon, which is a good change. At least it will be less annoying. And on the same token of the dungeons, they were very boring, and they had a lot of backtracking even after the beta. So apparently they've changed the layouts to get around this, so hopefully they'll be a little bit more useful. Hopefully there's a bigger handful of dungeons as well, not just the same. Some of them aren't even worth running. You'd only end up you'd scrap a lot of the sigils, and you'd only end up running 3 or 4 different dungeons over and over again. Also, a lot of the affixes that are supposed to make the dungeons nightmarish and challenging, they weren't really challenging. They were just annoying mechanics. In particular, I think the one a lot of people hated the most was there's that thing that chases you and then blows up, and the one that the lightning globe that you have to go underneath the globe before it kills you, that would one-shot people and stuff, and it's just not fun because all you're doing is running back and waiting. A lot of the game is waiting around for things to happen, which is the anathema of what an action RPG is supposed to be. They're supposed to be action. Legion events was basically a legion of demons, so you'd go to a place in the world and kill them, but the problem was there was no real point to do it. It was one of these shared group activities. You'd find a bunch of players there, and the monsters were well undertuned most of the time. They would die instantly, and the rewards were just not worth it. So it looks like they're increasing the experience and the reward drops. We'll have to see if that makes any difference. And then the world bosses. Now, these were supposed to be the giant raid-like enemies that you could all gather together and kill for a good loot drop and some items to upgrade enchant your weapons. Now, the problem was they were just big loot pinatas. They were pretty pathetically weak. They had little health. Once you got to the high levels, they will just blow up. In fact, in Season 1, since there's so much players just stopped playing, I ended up soloing a couple of them on a rogue, and at one other time I did it, there was a barbarian with me. Also, we just soloed it, and was no much trouble, because once you work out their attack patterns, they're not that difficult. They don't even really do that much damage. So again, it didn't seem to be that worth it, especially halfway through the season where they patched it so you could get their drops from the Nightmare Dungeons from memory, and so it just ended up being worthless. So they've increased the spawns to 3 hours. They've also increased their health and damage. Good. Quality of rewards received have been increased. In the morning when they will spawn, now broadcast an hour in advance. Okay, that's good, because I used to miss them all the time because I'd be doing something that I considered to be more important. And you also notified 15 minutes before, promising in the right direction. It just depends on how they've tuned them. Mounts. Oh boy, this has to be one of the worst implementations of a horse that I've ever encountered in any video game. They get caught on everything. They're just clunky, unresponsive, massive cooldowns on the abilities and on mounting and dismounting. Basically, you get caught on barriers. You'd have to dismount and kill a couple of skeletons that were hiding behind a barrier. Abilities that you get on them looked really cool, but they were absolutely useless because they did not scale with the monsters. So you basically do no damage. There's no point using them. And the cooldown would start when you mounted the horse. So what I would find You'd be racing along on your horse, getting to your location, you'd come across a big pack of monsters, and you'd go to use your dismount skill, and it's still on cooldown. So you have to manually get off the horse, kill them anyway, and then wait. They'd probably die in 5 seconds or even less. Sometimes just blow up as soon as you hit them. And then you'd get back on your horse, and it was back on cooldown again. So it's just really awful. It's like no one played it or tested it at all, and this seems to be a common theme, and I get the feeling maybe this occurred. Diablo 4 so far has really struck me as a design by committee type of game. I think they've got too many cooks in the kitchen, and they're probably all dealing with various different systems, and it just doesn't meld together very well. So let's have a look at what they're changing. The overall responsiveness of mounts has been improved. Mounts are now less likely to get stuck or slow down unexpectedly. I'll believe it when I see it. Mounts automatically jumping over traversals will now work more consistently. Okay, so I assume they mean when you run up to like a gap and the horse will just stop instead of jumping. The mouse cursor no longer needs to be at the edge of the screen for keyboard and mouse players to achieve full mouse speed. Oh, thank God. That was so annoying. Why that was designed like that in the first place, I have no idea. It just makes no sense. Base mount movement speed has increased by 14%. Your mount's top speed remains unchanged. I think the top speed was pretty good as it was. Apart from that brief period we were on control pad, it was not as fast as the keyboard players. But yeah, sorry, the speed boost from Spur has had its duration increased by 50%. Oh, that's good. Using Spur now allows mounts to break through barricades. Great, so I don't have to get off manually and kill the 2 skeleton dudes hiding behind it. Cooldowns. Manual mount cooldown has been reduced from 10 seconds to 5 seconds. The cooldown appearing after you have been forced to dismount from taking damage has been reduced from 30 seconds to 15. The cooldown for the mount combat skill has been reduced from 10 to 3 seconds. 3 seconds. Great. Very good. Why there's a cooldown at all, I'm not sure why there needs to be one. Is that just because they're worried about people being invulnerable? I don't know. Hold on a minute. There is no mention of the damage of the mount skills, so they're still going to be useless if it's the same, because they literally do no damage. Hopefully that's an oversight and they've just forgotten to add it to the patch notes. Towns. An occultist has set up shop at the Tree of Whispers waypoint. Additional stashes have been added to the capital cities near important vendors. Stashes have been added to all small towns with waypoints, and campaign skip waypoints are unlocked. Good, because the towns are really annoying. If you play like Diablo or Path of Exile, most of the time when you go to a teleporter, you go back to town, your stash is right there, maybe 2 or 3 steps away. In Diablo 4, how it currently stands is half the time you have to run back and forth, and it's just unnecessarily padding out the time. You're running from one end of the city to the other, and really gets tedious. This is a good change that should fix that side of things. Renown grind. Oh, basically you had to do this every season initially. They tried to pretend that they were like with the altars, that you weren't having to do them more than once, but it became pretty clear that they did expect you to do it every time, and they saw the backlash straight away. The renown was just as much problematic. It was basically power that you could not ignore behind a boring quest system. Now, some of the side quests are fine, but being forced to do them, and what I would do is I'd get to the end of the campaign and I'd do the renown grind. I did it twice now, and the first time was boring enough. The second time was unbearable. So now they've basically removed this completely from the game. It was probably the most tedious part of the game, really. So now you only have to do it once on any character. Hallelujah. I'd actually rather do the campaign every single time than have to do the renown every season, to be honest. So really, it's going to be interesting to see how you really engage to the game until you get to the end game without doing the campaign. I noticed some of the known blasters are looking at doing things like running the dopamine tunnels over and over again to level as fast as possible to endgame. I really hope that's not the most optimal way to do it. It probably is. I can't actually handle that. I get too bored. And we have new unique items. Itemization remains probably the game's biggest flaw. When a unique drops, you usually know what it is before you pick it up. Because the pool of items is so low and class restricted, most of the items also aren't worth using, so the more they put in there with valid ways to get them, the better. Now, the Uber unique situation is like a clear example. They've designed all these items that they made the chances to get them so low. I think only one person in Korea and I think one in China ever found like a Shaco or a grandfather. Imagine finding one of those items instead of winning the lottery, because that's basically the odds you're getting. Imagine burning all your luck and just getting a dumbass drop in Diablo 4 instead of winning millions of dollars. And updated unique powers to be more desirable. There's so little items in the game, really, when you think about it. They really need to lean into uniques and start getting their team to design a lot of interesting items to drop, because that's one of the reasons why the game it gets so monotonous. And new aspects. So basically Diablo 4 has two item types because whites and blues are completely useless, and legendaries are just yellows with an aspect attached, which you usually just destroy for the aspect. But more aspects are well deserved because we need more options and choices. And also new glyphs. I'm not going to get into detail because otherwise this video is going to go for 20 years, but we will see what the new glyphs open up for build opportunities. Again, more options is always good. Okay, the UI, a huge complaint that everyone's had about the UI, so let's have a look at what they've changed. So items can now be marked as favorite. Items marked this way cannot be sold or salvaged. I think before, it is from memory, you could mark things as junk, but almost everything you find in the game is junk. So yeah, you definitely want to mark as favorite when you find something good, so you can just trash everything else. They had it the opposite before. Items in the stash can now be marked as junk or favorite. Okay, you get a choice there. That's good. The stash can now be searched and filtered for more quickly find the items. This is one of my biggest criticisms about D4. Diablo 2. Go look at the artwork of the items. Now I know the Tetris system is controversial, but I find it preferable to the little square icons that they seem to have in action RPGs these days, because at least you start to get into your brain how big things are and you know what sort of item types you're looking at. Diablo, not only is the panel art not very good, all the items have generic icons, whereas Diablo 4, they've all got nice, even the unique items, they've got unique art, beautiful unique artwork. So it really drags the experience down for Diablo 4, and then you're sifting through massive amounts of items every single time you go back to town. It just gets very tiresome. So what else have we got here? Using the sell or junk option will now sell only junk in the active inventory tab. Extracted aspects with the same legendary power will now be grouped together when sorted in the inventory and stash. Good. The sorting of normal affixes on items has been improved to be more consistent. Okay, yeah. So when you look at an item in Diablo 2 and most other Diablo action RPGs, there's a system to how that displays information on an item to you. But with Diablo, it was all over the place, so you had to tediously look through every single item. So hopefully that has resolved this problem. Put an option in the menu to hide all combat text. Oh god, finally. Initially they wouldn't even let you hide damage numbers, but now that's been resolved. It was really bad for visibility, like you couldn't see what the hell was going on, or vulnerable and dodge and all this shit written across your screen, where really they should stop being lazy and make spell effects for it, but at least we'll be able to turn it off now. The mini-map has been zoomed out to display a wider area. Yeah, so there's been a big. There's a lot of people that are really unhappy that the removal of the overlay map. Now, I understand what Blizzard were going for here, and I kind of respect them for taking that stance, because you do see guys like Zizarin on YouTube when he plays Path of Exile or when he's streaming, and all you see is the overlay map. He has it up at all times. It doesn't make for a good viewing experience. I think that's why they did it that way. Stop people relying that as a crutch. But I said, I've always been thinking this as well. Well, why is the mini-map so zoomed in that you can't even, it's not useful? At least allow us to control how far it zooms out. Hopefully they've got the balance right here. I don't understand why they're so averse to giving control to the player. It looks like they've normalized enchanting costs. So the problem was you'd find an item that you'd want to enchant, and every time you tried to enchant it, it would go up so drastically amount in cost. You got to the point where you just couldn't justify rolling it again. You know, you'd be like 8, 9, 10 million gold just to get a randomized option. And then they'd also, halfway through the season, they changed it so you couldn't easily get the stats you wanted anymore, the way that they had the calculations rolling, which I assume was initially a bug, but they just made it even more tedious to get gear. Gems will no longer drop from regular sources and can instead be crafted at a jeweler. So this is the stash space problem. Blizzard claims that the way that the game's coded, when you go into town or you encounter other players, the game has to load their entire stash space. Why you would code it that way from the outset is anybody's guess. Apparently this is not the first time this type of issues come up with Blizzard as well. So I don't know if this is an excuse, they just want to sell us stashed tabs later on, or I don't know. It's a bit peculiar. So anyway, everyone was complaining that gems, which are relatively, you kind of find your gems and then you don't need to collect anymore, to be honest. They were taking up everyone's stash space, so... And they were worth no money, so there's no point selling them to a vendor, which I find bizarre. You've got these precious jewels and they're worth like a gold each. So they can be crafted at a jeweler and you get mats for them. Also, less elixir drops for inventory issues. I don't really have a problem with that. Now on to monsters. Level scaling in the open world has been adjusted. Now that could mean anything, so I won't comment further on that, other than to say the way they went about using leveling scaling in the world has been much discussed and criticized, and I agree it's terrible. One, you felt like you never got more powerful because the monsters always leveled up to you. They adjusted it so the monsters fell behind your power, failing to mention that they also changed the drop, so it was also worth less to actually kill them, which is a common thing with Blizzard. You've got to be careful what they say and pass off as a benefit and read between the lines, because quite often it comes with a very nasty downside. So in one foul swoop halfway through, or for season 1, they pretty much nerfed everything across the board and then made the overworld leveling useless. So they've generally reduced the evasiveness of many monsters. Now they've made this claim before with the ghosts, which probably is the my number one hated enemy to fight in the game. They're just really annoying. They're not fun to fight whatsoever. So let's hope that this time they've stayed true to their word and the monsters don't actually just constantly run away from you. And it wasn't that they ran away like they do in Diablo 2, like the goblins. They would actually like just back just out of your range constantly, and it was just like really annoying. The spider host cold explosion now chills instead of freezes. I guess this is an answer to the criticism about crowd control. One of the only times, once you get your handle of your character and you've got a decent build, one of the only times you will die in Diablo 4 is when you get hardlock crowd control by a bunch of enemies, and the visual feedback of the game is quite terrible in some respects. You would just sometimes not even see that there was like a explosion underneath you or something, and you'd some really cheap one-shot sort of deaths, or you'd get stun locked in a crowd control situation and things would just kill you. You'd get stun locked over and over again, and I don't know if that was because the resistance weren't working. More on that shortly, but we'll see what they've done now. It looks like an attempt to reduce crowd control across the board, and ghost monsters have received a visual upgrade. Oh god, I didn't expect this, and no one else has mentioned it that I've seen They honestly look like PlayStation 2 graphics on the current game. This came across really lazy, so I'm quite actually interested and excited to see what they've done. Hopefully they've made them actually look like ghosts instead of little green and orange polygonal figures from PlayStation 2. Experience. Now reports say this is 40% higher. Well, I hope it's not too fast. It is very grindy right now, but we don't need another Diablo 3 Blizzard, please. It seems like a band-aid fix to fix the in-game grind, which is admittedly extremely boring right now. But it's a delicate balance, and I would actually argue that the problem with the grind at the end game is not the experience gain, it's the itemization. So, the level at which players will receive the priority quest for unlocking the next World Tier difficulty has been increased. World Tier 3 from 40 to 48 and World Tier 4 from 60 to 68. Now, I find this interesting. From memory, they changed when you could enter the capstone dungeon before you could get to the next world tier because people were pushing too fast. So once again, Blizzard's attempt to slow us down. And so what they did is they changed all the level scaling. Now, I can't remember exactly, but on my Necro, I think I hit world tier 4 at level 60, and on my Rogue, I did it at level 64 from memory. And now when you pass the capstone dungeon, you find yourself level 63 in the world tier 4, but then you look at the world and they've scaled it up to level 75, which was insane. So you know, it was actually better. It was reading between the lines with Blizzard, because you're actually better and faster to just stay at the previous world tier 4 than push ahead for most people, I imagine. And then once you actually got to level 60 or 61, I think it was, all of a sudden the world would come down to level 73. It just made no sense. Be interesting to see how this works now. You only get notification. Apparently you still can enter it whenever you want. I'll be testing this because I usually get bored of the previous world tier and want to get to the next one. Rewards for completing side quests have been improved to scale with higher world tiers. So is it better to level to world tier 4? I'm suspicious about this changed. So it seems to me like you just want to grind monsters and then save all the quests for... And they've increased monster density for certain events. That's good, because some of them, like, they were just not worth doing. And I do like doing the events. I'd rather do that for the most part across the world than some of the other activities, but they just weren't worth it sometimes. And increase the speed of progression for the following events: time between waves, time to start, time to end, etc. Great, because that's another problem. You'd sit around waiting all the time with Diablo 4 in general. It's always like they're artificially trying to pad out your time like it's an MMO on a subscription base, you know, for a paid game. So they're just slowing you at every step of the chain, which is what makes playing the game quite frustrating and unenjoyable. The health of stranded NPCs that need to be protected to achieve mastery goals for events now scales better in higher level areas and dungeons to increase their survivability. Because this looks like another oversight that they never tested, because you'd go into a high level dungeon, there'd be someone saying, please help me, the spiders are going to eat my face, and they would still be like level 1 or still be like level 4 or something. So you had to make sure they didn't get hit at all, which is a nigh impossibility sometimes for the events that actually had a decent monster density. Now we're moving on to items. Only uniques, legendaries and rares drop. 2 item types plus aspects. That's all the game has now, which is very dangerous. I think they really need to lean into the itemization and fix it. Now, resistances. In the current game up to Season 1, resistances basically were dead stats. Resistance didn't work at all. It was fundamentally broken. Stacking armor was the only defense, and until this point, that was all you could do. The too long didn't read about this is basically they've changed it to how it was in Diablo 2 or how it is in Path of Exile. So that is basically how it's been proven to work in these games. I find it mind-boggling that this developer has the source code to Diablo 2 and they still insist to try and reinvent the wheel every single time. Some things are the way they are just because they work that way, and you don't need to change them just for the sake of it. This is a running theme in Diablo since Diablo 3. Recently, Blizzard dropped a video which clearly demonstrated they cannot do basic math. And it makes me wonder how this can't have massive implications about some of the mind-boggling balance decisions they've made in this game, and if we can trust them to get it right in this patch. You'll see my boy Rax here laughing his ass off, as I believe he's got a maths degree, and he's saying, hey Blizzard, if you need help, send us your video and I'll double check it for you. It's just crazy. Now Blizzard sort of tried to take this as a joke and pretend that this was just a meme, and they couldn't believe that it got on social media and they walked it back, but I have similar questions, and I can only imagine that this is an excuse, because how else could this happen? I don't know. But basically the too long didn't read of it is you will stack resistance on gear, on the tree, etc. until you get to 75% with extra bonuses to increase the cap to 85. And they restored the previously nerfed armor aspect, was it disobedience? I assume to compensate for the physical damage. Crit and vulnerability changes. So just a bit of commentary on this. Since the game has been released, every viable build basically maxed out crit and vulnerability, and this was due to the nonsensical way they were calculating this damage multiplicatively in what they call damage buckets. Now, I won't go into the concept of this for this video for brevity because it's already getting too long, but basically in Season 1, they nerfed these two stats heavily, but the end result being you needed more of them, not less, due to how the game works at a mechanical and mathematical level. At the time, I was baffled that they seemingly didn't understand this, but after their latest Diablo math video, I no longer wonder. I won't comment further on this, and we'll just have to see how it pans out. Class balance. This is another wait and see for me, but I'll be interested to know if the Trad Necros will be finally happy with the minion changes. I know Kriparian had builds that worked very well even before, but I don't tend to play minion-based builds even though I do like the Necromancer class. Now, the Battle Pass debacle. I have to admit that I originally was not going to play this season and had deleted Diablo 4 from my SSD in relative disgust. And the Battle Pass debacle was the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. I'm getting on in life and I can at times get RSI in my mouse hand due to all the clicking. So at one point this season I decided to try Diablo 4 out on gamepad. As I was getting used to the controls, I went to check my seasonal tab and pressed a button, which consumed the season pass token I got for purchasing the game, a token I had intended to keep for a more interesting season. This was discussed at large on the internet at the time as being a dark UI design. There was no indication that the premium pass purchase was selected when opening this menu, and if you clicked, then there was also no confirmation if you were certain to expend your token. Now this functionality, you must understand, exists in other parts of the game when destroying items. Why did it not exist for something as vital as something that you could potentially have to spend real-life money on? This was, to me, obviously on purpose and is a really scummy move by Blizzard, and you know it was on purpose because they then refused to refund any consumed tokens. And after the outcry, a patch was hastily pushed out to remedy this design, but I'm sure the damage had already been done. Coupled with the fact they don't even give you enough credit to buy the next season battle pass if you complete it, which from what I understand, because I don't typically play games with battle passes, but what I understand is basically that's the industry standard. But I'm going to try season 2, if not for sheer curiosity. At this point, I'd just like to make a few comments on Diablo 4 versus its competitors. D4 has good feeling weighty combat, but it's nowhere near on the level of something like Lost Ark. This is a flaw among the vast majority of action RPGs and why I am not that fond of Grim Dawn or Last Epoch. It seems most Western developers still struggle with this stuff. Path of Exile, as criticized as it is in some aspects, is actually better than most action RPGs in this regard, and Diablo 2 Resurrected still feels better than the vast majority despite being relatively simple and a little bit archaic in some elements of its design. I've mentioned this in the past, but Japanese developers have a good handle on this in terms of using hit, stun, and impact to create weight in the combat. It's very vital, and if it doesn't have that crunchy feeling, I lose interest in action RPGs, unfortunately. With Lost Ark, I love the combat in that. I just didn't like the gameplay systems that were wrapped around it. The only good thing about it to me were the boss fights. The graphics are nice, but they're a little too grey and boring. D2R, I feel, is a much better looking game. They got the grim dark right in D4, but Diablo 2 was not a dreary game. It's a very colourful and vibrant game. The spell effects in particular are vastly superior in Diablo 2, particularly the ice and lightning. Grim Dawn and Last Epoch, and obviously Path of Exile, are just vastly better designed games at a mechanical level, and we'll have to see if the Season 2 patch fixes this in any way. Much has been said about Diablo 4 being a good foundation with a very flawed endgame. I disagree. I think it has a terrible foundation, basically needs a complete rework, and at least its itemization. It boggles my mind that this company created and holds the rights to Diablo 2, and they keep trying to reinvent the wheel with itemization in every game. Yes, Diablo 2 has flaws here, in particular the over-reliance on runewords, but this could be addressed and you would have a near-perfect loot system. This is what keeps people coming back to playing Diablo 2 after all these years, a game that's over 20 years old. And finally, to close this video off, I would like to just talk about what's not being addressed in this patch. The mini-map zoom, but no camera options. Now, Grim Dawn has full camera tilt and zoom. I don't understand why they can't allow us to have control of the camera a little bit. There are moments in the game where, say, the Tree of Whispers, where the camera zooms out, and maybe that's a bit too far, but at least let us have it halfway, or just give us control. Like, really, is that going to hurt? Is it because of consoles? Are we suffering from the console's design again because that's how much they can render on the screen? I don't know. I think one thing that people don't tend to consider is what crossplay can actually do to affect design of the game. The horse ability cooldowns and mount ability damage. Now, looks like they've addressed the cooldowns. We'll have to see how that feels. But the mount abilities are still useless unless there's some sort of oversight in the patch notes and they forgot to mention it. Itemization. Although should be improved in this update, it has fundamental problems and really needs a 2.0 update. And no, not a Diablo 3 2.0 update, please. I'm one of the few people, I guess, that is on Asmongold's train about this, and I actually think that Diablo 3, as bad as it was at release with the real money auction house and all that sort of nonsense, it was actually a better game, and I'm one of the people that did get to the hell brick wall that made a lot of people not be able to get past Act 1. I think I was in Act 3. I didn't beat Crip or anything, got nowhere near. I was one of the few, I think, that got into the end game pretty quickly. I did have a cheap build. There was a sorceress build you could do that used the hurricanes to reset the diamond skin. I think that eventually got patched out. The problem with Diablo 3's 2.0 is when it showers you with items, when everything's special, nothing is. And it just ends up getting boring, and we've got a danger of that happening in Diablo 4, where all you're worried about is yellows and getting showered with oranges, and you don't get that wow moment when some nice rune drops, or a really unique, good unique item, or even a set item that you're looking for. So the game was touted as the most flexible game in the series, yet they've only have to be talking about the character appearance editor because it's more limited than any other game. In Diablo 2, I have a sorceress that can not only use a sword if I want and strike with it, she has a bow that, when fire enchanted, is more than enough to deal with any fire immune monsters in hell that come my way. These options are just not possible in Diablo 4 because you can't default attack with weapons. In Diablo 2, for example, you can use any weapon you have stats to equip. In Diablo 4, you're locked to class weapons. It's lame. Yes, I know it's not optimal, but let me not be optimal if I want the choice, instead of non-effectively pew-pewing away with my Harry Potter stick. It's just really dumb. I mean, I can't imagine why they did that. Annoying, even more annoying, is if you play Necromancer, when you start the game, you don't have any spells or abilities. You actually have a default attack. But as soon as you pick up a spell, they take that away from you. It's like, just leave it on the thing. Let me use a weapon a bow if I want to. And it would actually give you choice, potential off-meta builds and fun stuff to do, in the game. Instead, you're restricted to these particular weapons. And for that matter, it sort of goes against the nature of what these games are supposed to be about. I understand Blizzard are mortified about dealing with trading again because of the real money auction house debacle. But, it's just better for these types of games, and they really should put it in and add the UI elements to facilitate the trading. Because that's why people love Path of Exile, The world level scaling. We're going to have to see how it feels in this patch, but I feel like they've missed the mark completely, and it needs a rework here. I'll reserve judgment on this one, but I feel like it's still going to be an issue going forward. With the boring endgame, I know they've added a few new bosses now and targeting farming. This is a very good step in the right direction. Gives you something to actually do at the end game other than Lilith, and something to work towards. No, I've been playing Diablo 4 and just quitting at level 75 because your build's complete and you've got another 25 levels of grinding with nothing really to do other than Lilith to get a lame mount skin that looks worse than the mount skins you've already got. So hopefully Season 2 will work towards that, but there needs to be a lot more, and by the sounds of things, they're really focusing on the end game next. So let's see. And where is Diablo? I'm well aware they're probably saving him for later to sell to us in an X-Pack, and they've said there's going to be yearly expansions. I'm worried about this because it's taken them 6 months to get the game out of early access, it feels. So, let's see what Season 2 brings us, shall we? We'll find out in a few hours. I have learnt not to trust Blizzard, sadly, and I am sure they will find a way to either royally fuck this up or, in between the lines that are not being said, that will infuriate the community that so desperately wants this game to be good. I think that's all I have for today. Always happy to read what everyone thinks and how full of shit I am in the comments below. The more likes, subscriptions and comments I receive will result in more opportunities for everyone to do so. And until next time, the Necropantic One, signing out.